Okay, here is the next PowerPoint lecture for the stuff on culture for Scott High School. And we just finished talking about countercultures and how countercultures endorse cultural values and norms that oppose those of mainstream society. We live in a pluralistic society, a society made up of many cultures. Essentially, most societies, really all societies, are pluralistic. I already made the comment that you don't have to look very far down the hallways of your school, your community, our state, to find the influence of different cultures. Some other important concepts and terms that we will be discussing, as I adjust my camera here, include norms, sanctions, values, beliefs, ideal versus real culture, and we'll talk about these as we go. Cultural universals, mores, folkways, ethnocentrism, as well as multiculturalism. Norms are rules and expectations by which a society guides the behaviors of its members. Norms are not necessarily laws. They can be, but they're really just rules for appropriate or expectations for appropriate behavior. We can think of norms that are associated with classroom behavior, for example. As a teacher or instructor, I expect students to sit in class quietly unless they have a question to ask. I expect them to come to class, to turn in assignments, to raise their hand when they want to speak, etc., etc. And I'm sure there are norms associated with instructors or teachers. You guys expect teachers or instructors to be prepared, to be knowledgeable, to kind of know what they're talking about, to give exams, to give you grades. Also, norms that are associated with one setting may or may not be associated with a different setting. For example, at a funeral, it is normative to be docile, demure, quiet, respectful, to dress up. Conversely, at a sporting event at your high school, it would be more appropriate, perhaps, to jump up and down, to scream, to yell, to root for your team. Probably at a funeral, you're not going to be jumping up and down and cussing and drinking beer and yelling and screaming. Well, you may, I guess, depends on where you live, but probably not so much. So norms will vary from setting to setting. We talk about sanctions, and there are two types of sanctions that we'll talk about. A sanction is a reward or a punishment that will either encourage, that will encourage conformity to cultural norms. A positive sanction is simply a reward. You get money for doing a good job at work. You may get a raise. That would be a positive sanction. You get a pat on the back or a thank you for letting someone in front of you in traffic or for holding the door for someone. A negative sanction is a punishment. For example, if you skip line at Walmart, very likely that you may receive a scolding or a dirty look, or worse, perhaps. So there are sanctions, rewards, and punishments for either adhering to or violating cultural norms. Let me talk about values, adjusting my camera one more time. Values are ideals or aspirations we hold to be very important in society. Beliefs, on the other hand, are things that we hold to be true. For example, in our American society, we value equality among men and women. So equality would be a value. From this value, most American citizens believe, there's a belief, that a woman could be president and that women can hold high-ranking positions in business and industry. And I'm going to get the next PowerPoint up here for you. There we go. Now, continuing on with the second installment of our lecture on culture, if you will. Back to the idea of norms. Two types of norms we will discuss initially, mores and folkways. Again, if you remember, a norm is simply an expected way to behave in a given situation. Mores are norms that are widely observed and have great moral significance. Folkways, on the other hand, are norms for routine or casual interaction. Examples of mores are insistence that adults not engage in sexual relations with children, would be one. Also, our insistence that people not murder other people. So to murder or to engage in pedophilia would be violations of mores within our society. Stealing from other people, breaking into others' homes and stealing personal property would be considered a violation of a more. Now, folkways are a little different. We're still talking about norms. For example, if you've ever been driving and you let someone out in front of you in traffic, you expect, at a minimum, some kind of a thank you, or I call it the courtesy wave. That's kind of what you do. Someone lets you out in front of you or lets you in front of them in line, you wave or you acknowledge, you say thank you. To not do that, to not get the courtesy wave, and we've all not gotten the courtesy wave, would be a violation of a folkway. Appropriate dress. If I come to class wearing shorts, a tank top, and sandals, yikes. I'm not going to do that, by the way. And you're not going to see me anyway, so then I have violated a folkway of dressing appropriately. It's not as egregious as committing murder or something of that sort, but nevertheless. Waiting your turn in line. If I skip line at Walmart, I have violated the folkway of waiting my turn. So again, not as bad as murder or rape or things of that sort, but still. Okay, then we move into the idea of ideal versus real culture. Values and norms do not describe actual behaviors as much as they suggest how we should behave. So, ideal culture refers to, or collectively, our notions about how culture really should be. It's an aspiration. We have these ideas that men and women should be equal, that men and women should participate equally in household chores and child-rearing duties, that people should remain faithful in relationships. We should treat one another well. Does this always happen? Well, obviously not. Real culture is how culturally actually is, how it really is in real life. And your book talks about the difference between the two. I'm going to stick with the example I started with housework. When surveyed, men and women both claim that housework and childcare duties should be shared equally. So this represents ideal culture. So if you ask people, they're like, yeah, men and women alike will say, yeah, we should be sharing these duties equally. Looks good, doesn't it? But when it comes right down to it, based on a representative sample of all U.S. families, recent research reveals husbands create an extra 7 hours a week of housework for wives. But wives save husbands from about an hour a week. So in actuality, women are still doing more housework and they're still caring more for children than are their male counterparts. And you can see here with this chart, weekly hours of basic housework by gender. In 1976, women were performing 26 to 27 hours of housework a week, while men were performing about 7 or 8. Now, the gap has lessened. In 2005, women are performing around 16 hours a week, and men are right at about 12 or 13. So it's getting closer, but still women are doing the lion's share of the housework. The amount of housework done by women has decreased since 1976, while the amount of housework done by men has doubled. In 1976, women did about 26 hours a week. In 2005, they did 16.5. So you can just see we're kind of explaining what we just saw right here. So you can pause this and kind of look at it at your leisure. Weekly hours of basic housework by gender and marital status. So you can see, you can pause this and kind of look at it and process it. Single women, single men, and married men. It's pretty much married women are still doing most of the housework. They're performing more hours of housework, whereas pretty much married men are doing least. They're doing the least amount. So, and we're kind of this kind of explains the chart that we just saw right here. So you can pause that and kind of read through it. One more example of ideal versus real culture in the United States: marital relationship, fidelity, or monogamy. Again, when you ask men and women, they both claim that infidelity is a big problem and that it's not okay. So this is considered to be a component of ideal culture. But according to research, here's what we find. Even though both report it being a problem, both men and women report this being a problem, you can see the percentage of marriages where one or both spouses admit to infidelity, either physically or emotionally, 41%. 57% of men admit to committing infidelity in any relationship they've had. 54% of women do so. Percentage of men and women who admit to having an affair with a coworker, 36%. Percentage of men and women who admit to infidelity on business trips, 36%. Percentage of men and women who admit to infidelity emotionally or physically with a brother-in-law or sister-in-law, 17%. So, we're seeing the problem here. The average length of an affair is approximately 2 years. The percentage of marriages that last after an affair has been admitted to or discovered, 31%. So we're seeing some more statistics here. Percentage of men who say they would have an affair if they knew they would never get caught, 74%. While 68% of women say that they would have an affair if they knew they would never get caught. So we'll call this the end of this part. Thank you.